Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we are reviewing another book. This is not the usual novels that we review. It is not a fantasy or a science fiction book. It is The Paper Menagerie End of the Stories by Ken Liu. If you've been following the channel for a bit, you probably have heard the name Ken Liu before, and that's partially because I've read and reviewed the first book of his series called The Dandelion Dynasty. The book is named The Grace of Kings. You can check out the review here on the channel, either through the thumbnail or the cards up above, and you can go see if you enjoy that type of book, or if you're just here for the short story type of writing, then you came to the right place because that's what we're reviewing. So what to say about this book? To start off with, well, it is composed of 15 short stories. Some are fantasy, some are science fiction, some are a mix of both. It was originally published as a collection in 2016, and even then, at that point, some of these short stories had already won a few awards. But as a collection, this book won in 2017 the Locus Award for Best Collection. So Ken Liu has plenty of accolades in this book. On Goodreads, this book has over 37,000 ratings, or no, actually close to 37,000 ratings at the recording of this video, and an average score of 4.36 out of 5. Which is pretty good. I mean, I don't know much how the short story books usually fare in terms of scores on Goodreads, but a 4.36 sounds pretty good because it means that a lot of people gave 5s to this book, and I guess that if 5s, they must have loved all of the short stories. But moving on, usually in this section we would have me reading a synopsis so that we could get a sense of what the book is about, and then me talking about previous scores that I gave to the previous books of a series. However, because this doesn't really have a synopsis and this is not part of a series, I guess I'm just not doing any of those and skipping right into the review with our categories. But before I jump into the review, let me just explain how I rated or how I reviewed this book, because you could just review each individual short story, which would be very hard and a very long video because there are 15 short stories. Some are super short, which makes it very hard to give a proper score. Or you can do this as a collection, as a whole, and that's what I try to do. Of course, I have a sense of what the scores for each short story are, but what I did was basically average all of them into one score for the collection. But so let's get a move on, starting with plot. Ken Liu provides us with a wide range of different plots. None of these stories feel repetitive. They are all quite different from each other with their own plots, their twists, their arcs, their evolutions. Some are very short and simple, and there's nothing wrong with that, because Ken Liu is still capable of delivering a good story and also deliver a good message with them. An example of this is the bookmarking habits of select species. It was a very short tale, and still it was able to convey a really good message. Whereas there are other short stories that are longer and have a proper narrative with a more intricate plot, and some of those are, for example, The Regular or The Man Who Ended History, a documentary. And I think overall they're all quite good. Some of these have a feel of Black Mirror episodes from when they were good, meaning the first few seasons, whereas others might be a bit more predictable. But like I said, nothing too bad, nothing too negative. I think overall all of them are quite enjoyable. There are some things related to writing style and plot that I think bring down the score a bit, but I'm gonna give that to writing style, so I'll speak on that category. But for now, I'm gonna say that plot is a 4 out of 5. Moving on to characters, I think Ken Liu is great at creating personable and relatable characters, and especially in very short amount of words, because all of these, I think, don't have a bit more than 100 pages, if that much. And I think in every story I was able to understand who the protagonist was, what their dreams were, what their ambitions, why they were doing the things they were doing, which is quite important for the motive of the story to progress and for their arcs when they exist to progress. Because yeah, the stories that were short, of course we don't expect them to have a huge development in terms of the protagonist. However, the ones that were a bit long, you could still see a development and just a mini arc of that character. However, I do think this is mostly associated with the protagonists because the side characters or the secondary characters didn't receive the same treatment. I mean, in short stories, you do not expect them to receive the same level of treatment as the protagonist. I mean, not even in novels, certain novels do not get the same level of protagonists compared with other characters. And at the same time, I'm not expecting the protagonist and the side characters to have the level of deepness, connection, relatedness as, for example, Wheel of Time, where there's 14 books. Of course, you'll fall in love with some characters after reading so long about them. But I feel like in some cases, the side characters are very two-dimensional. And what I mean by this is that they could just be some NPC that is just there saying the words they need to say for the plot to move forward, or for our protagonist to just be triggered to do the next step. And so they don't really feel as real people. But I mean, I'm not saying all short stories have that. I think some of the short stories, like the Paper Menagerie or the Literamancer, had really good side characters. So I think overall, for this, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5. Let's talk about world building now. With the Dandelion Dynasty, I had already some appreciation on Ken Liu's world building and world crafting. But I think this book allowed me to see how expansive his imagination is. The different settings in which he creates worlds and universes are quite good. For example, the bookmarked habits of secret species, of select species. It was so short, but it had so much detail in it about different species and their ways, and I thought that was very well done. And then we have the different magics and the different technologies that he introduces us to, which are all feeling very fresh. And also, in regards to the technologies, they all feel very plausible, which is a big thing in science fiction. If it feels too fantastical, it detracts a bit from the science fiction aspect of it. So feeling very plausible, and actually that the problems those technologies were creating could actually be real, I think really helped to make the worlds feel more vivid and more real. Like I said before, some of these episodes had the same caliber as Black Mirror, the first seasons, and I would not be surprised if there were episodes that were written by Ken Liu, because he did them quite well. And aside from that, I would have loved to see some of these short stories be turned into full novels. I mean, not necessarily the actual plot of these short stories, but just the universe, and put a new story in it that is adapted to a full novel, and I think it would have been really good. So all of this just to say that for this category, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. Moving on to writing style, I think Ken Liu, the way he describes things, is very appropriate to the short story narrative. And I started noticing this because when I read The Grace of Kings, and now reading this book, I realized that he does a lot of short storytelling. Because in The Grace of Kings, we do have a more long, overarching narrative, but it is very common for chapters to suddenly show up where we go back in time to see how a character grew up, or we go to this other side of the world, tell this small story about this person that will eventually be relevant later on. And I think his writing is very well adapted to that style. And I think his notion of pacing is also very good for short stories, because in a short story, you don't have those things I keep talking about, which they are the valleys and peaks in pacing, but you have more of a steady climb, or you just have a very little bumps until suddenly there's a climax and the short story ends in a big bang, or this plot twist that happens, or something like that. And I think he does them very well. Now, regarding the themes that he talks in these stories, I think a lot of them were very good. It does allow for the reader to learn a lot, not only about Chinese history, but also Japanese history. And of course, some of these tales use our history to talk about colonialism and slavery. However, I did feel that some of them were a bit too overt in their message. I think instead of being woven in the story for us to understand it and capture it, there was just blaring messaging of like, this is wrong or this shouldn't be done, that type of thing. And that kind of took me a bit out of the immersiveness of the story. And I think that's also partially by the way this book, this collection was done, because there are a few short stories towards the end that all have a very similar message to send. And once you've read the first one, you're okay, you think it's great. Once you read the second one, you're like, oh, okay, I'm noticing a pattern, but it's fine, it's just you. Once you read the third one, then it starts becoming more repetitive, more obvious, and that eventually ends up extracting you from the story. So basically, individually, each story would have been a great message, but I think just put all together, again, becomes very repetitive. But I mean, for some people, that'll be fine. They'll enjoy the message nonetheless. This part is very subjective, but for me, it did a bit of that abstraction, that extraction of the story, and I felt a bit alienated by the amount of times it was being tried to be forced fed upon me. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. And for the last category, enjoyment, which if I just said that the previous category was subjective, I mean, this one is the pinnacle of subjective because it is really just up to me if I enjoyed this book or not. And I did enjoy this book. I think all the short stories were good. Some better than others, of course. I had some short stories that I would give a 5 out of 5, and then I would have other short stories where I would give less. Like I keep saying, I enjoyed tremendously the ones that seemed like Black Mirror episodes because I like that style of storytelling a lot. But I mean, even the ones where I struggled a tiny bit, it was never too much because again, these are short stories. They aren't that long. So if I was starting to struggle, the short story was over and I could move on to a new short story. I think that's the beauty of short story collections is that you don't have this investment that you know it's going to last 600 pages or something like that. It's just 100 pages, sometimes even less, and you move on to the next story. So overall, my enjoyment, I would average it out to a 4 out of 5. And so we reached the end of this review. Just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 4 for characters, 5 for world building, 3 for writing style, and 4 for enjoyment. And this gives us a final score of 4 out of 5. Which, okay, is a bit lower than the Goodreads. This is not usual. I tend to give higher scores than Goodreads, but I can understand why people would really love it, and I can also understand why I gave it a bit less, because for me, there were some things that just really detracted a bit from the immersiveness of the story. But I mean, if you like short stories, I will definitely recommend this book because I think it is a very good short story collection. And some of these short stories are top for me. And who knows, maybe if you are curious, you read the Dandelion Dynasty, I would recommend read some more Ken Liu. He is good. And if you've read the short stories, read the Dandelion Dynasty. I mean, I'm reading the second one right now, The Wall of Storms, and I think I'm enjoying it more than the first one. But let's see, I'm only like 10%, so let's knock on wood. I don't want to ruin my experience. Anyways, that also means that in about a month or so, you will have my review for it. But for now, let me know. Which one of these short stories did you enjoy the most, or are you curious to read this book? Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and you shall be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, except maybe the next couple of weeks, because at the moment of this video, I am actually abroad in a conference working, so I can't produce as much content as I want, but we shall see when the next time I show up, alright? See you soon!